Well, it is that time of the year again where we are talking about the inclusion of the South African teams in the Champions Cup. Welcome back to the channel. After a couple of weeks of action in this year's Champions Cup, naturally the conversation gets onto the position of the South African teams, having to travel a long way in a short space of time, rotating their squads and therefore the competitiveness of the game. So that's what I'm going to try and talk about in this video, explain, particularly off the back of John Dobson's comments, where we kind of are with the discussion around this and give my view and a possible solution to this, although I'll be honest, I don't think there is a silver bullet to completely fix the issue. But let me know what you make of it in the comments section. Also, like the video and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that subscribe button and you will not miss a thing. So every year, as I say, this seems to be something we're talking about. And I want it to work for the South African sides in the Champions Cup because I think when you look at the URC and their inclusion in that competition, it 100% has enhanced it. It's made it more competitive. It's made the dynamic of those playoffs, I think, far more interesting than it has been previously, exhibited by the fact that Leinster haven't been winning the URC since the South African teams have come into it. We've had some great runs to finals. But in the Champions Cup, because of the nature of the fixture schedule, the tight turnaround, it just seems to be more of an issue. There seems to be more teething problems. And I suppose we should say as well that this is coming at a time when the Champions Cup is probably at its lowest ebb that it's ever been. Arguably, it's not the competition that it once was. So maybe this is just another issue on top of many others that we currently see in the competition. But it is a big one. So as I say, John Dobson, the Stormers head coach, was speaking after their defeat to Harlequins. 53-16, they lost this weekend. And he essentially said that they need to sit down with the organisers and find a solution to this. His argument was they're arriving on a Wednesday, they're playing on a Saturday, they're often having to rotate their teams before they get back into their fixtures in the URC. Obviously, the South African teams over the Christmas period have their, well, not local derbies, but you know what I mean, the games against the other South African sides, which are always pretty well attended, important fixtures for them where they want to have their frontline players playing. And the Springboks have just finished a tour in the Northern Hemisphere. So how many guys who've probably just flown back from the Northern Hemisphere are then going to get on a plane again for 3 days, play a game, come back? They have to look after the players at some point. And what I will say actually to John Dobson is any of you that have over the last few years heard him speak about the Champions Cup and the position of the South African teams in it, he fully respects the history and the significance of this competition. And I think he really wants it to work. So it's interesting to hear him saying that something needs to be done and something needs to change, because what he also said was it would be disastrous for the South African teams to not be a part of it because of the competition it does give them. He said how competitive every area of the game is. I guess when you're coming up against some of those big French teams, the likes of Leinster, Toulouse, Bordeaux, you're coming up against the best of the best in terms of club rugby. And he's saying that's having a knock-on effect, a positive one for the Springboks, and part of the reason we've seen them be so successful over the last couple of World Cups. And I suppose if South African teams were to drop out of the Champions Cup, then that would open the door to conversations around a British and Irish league, which I think is what he's fearing, because that would cut them adrift. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but I think that's part of John Dobson's thinking. Plumtree, on the other hand, of the Sharks, hasn't been quite as diplomatic, and he has ultimately pointed the finger at the organisers and the travel. And when you look at it, these are clubs that sometimes they're not even flying direct. They're having to go to the Middle East before flying back into Europe, a short turnaround. And that's the reason that we're not seeing competitive fixtures as we would like to see. So where are we with this? What is the solution? Is there a solution? You might say there isn't. You might say that this is something that is just ultimately never going to fully work. I think they can at least try some things though. And I think Plumtree and Dobson are right. The fixture list needs to be tweaked. Why would we force the Sharks and the Stormers into a short turnaround to come up to the Northern Hemisphere for a game just for the 1 week before having to fly back? And I suppose the URC, I think, have worked this out better, haven't they? In that giving them block fixtures so that you're coming up for a couple of weeks. Is there any scope for them being able to do that for the URC? So we've just had 2 weeks of action. Could the South African sides either had both of their home games or both of their away games in that time? It doesn't necessarily solve the issue of the knockout rounds. And we saw last year, was it the Bulls, I think, that came up to play Munster, and they made so many changes because, again, it was a tight turnaround from the last 16 into the quarterfinals. I think that was the way it was. So they didn't really have time to prepare. They had to book their flights, they rotated their team, and they lost comfortably. So I don't think that necessarily solves the knockout rounds, but it could solve the pool stages at least. And then the other thing I was wondering actually is, could the pool stage be done in a month? Rather than having 2 weeks, going back to the domestic action, whether it's Prem, Top 14 or URC, and then coming back for another couple of rounds. Could you get all 4 pool stage rounds done on back-to-back weekends? Don't quite know how it would exactly work because obviously we've got the autumn internationals. You'd probably have to be stricter on not allowing the international teams to play out of test windows. But if you could say start the pool stage rounds on the final weekend of November and then run it through until just before Christmas, so you get them all out the way, and then you have the block fixtures. So again, you could have South African teams 2 at home and then 2 away. And it maybe just makes it a bit more manageable, and we can see full strength sides or something close to full strength sides in each round of the pool stages. As I say, there's not a silver bullet. It's certainly not straightforward. I don't have all the answers, otherwise I'll be making a lot of money in rugby administration. But what do you make of that? Could you get the pool stages out the way? And then maybe you have to lose the round of 16. You lose the round of 16, so then you've just got, 3 knockout rounds, but 2 knockout rounds before the final. You can have weeks in between them so teams can prepare and adjust their travel and things like that. Off the top of my head, that would be my suggestion. There might be some of you that are saying it simply doesn't work having South African sides in the Champions Cup. Ultimately, I want it to, and that's why I'm trying to think of the solution. But let me know. Comment down below, like the video as well, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.